So once upon a time at the origins of the web, we didn't have a lot of choices with fonts because you had to be sure that the fonts that you were going to use on a website were installed on somebody else's computer. It was possible to use a funky font and then turn it just into a dead image, but those tended to look kind of mushy. So what you really wanted to have was a live font because that allows people to copy and paste it, for screen readers to read it, and so on and so forth. So for a long time, we only had a very limited set of fonts to pick from. But now that you can assume that people's internet connections are relatively fast for the most part, you can actually get a custom font and then package it with your website. So even if the computer that's going to load your website doesn't have the font, when they open up the page, they essentially download the font at that point, and then you can have your cake and eat it too. You can have interesting custom fonts, and you can also get them. You don't have to, reduce them to an image, and you can keep all of their font properties. So there's a couple places to get these. Google Fonts is a great place to look, and if you're going to be making a commercial site or making money on your site or something like that, you do want to look into the licenses of the fonts. So some of them will say you can use these as long as it's for non-commercial purposes. Some fonts you just have to buy outright. But as far as I understand, if it's for education and we're just kind of using this to figure out web design, you can pretty much use anything you find on Google Fonts. Another thing I like about Google Fonts is it's really visual. So I'm not really a type nerd. There's people out there that really, really know everything about type. Just a couple things to consider. For example, we can do a search for serif fonts, right? So those are going to be the ones that have the little kind of curly cues on the tips of the letters, whereas sans serif is without serif. So you're going to have something more like this down here. These are serif, or rather sans serif fonts. Handwriting fonts are going to be more naturalistic, right? Monospace, and I is going to take up the same amount of space as an M horizontally, and so on. So if you want, you can test this and see what it's going to look like. So I can say like my great sentence, and then I can go down in here and see all of these very, very minute variations, some more minute than others. There's other free font websites out there too. I'm always a little leery of Googling anything plus the word free because it seems like a good way to get a virus on your computer. But there are some established sites out there like defont.com that'll have different kind of searches. So here I can say like specifically I want to look up something that's Elvish runes or whatever. So maybe this one has a little more variety and is a little bit less serious than Google Fonts. But in either case, when you find a font that you want to use, you're going to pick one out. And so let's click on Montserrat here, for example. I feel like that might actually be on some machines already. I'm not sure. So you pick the ones that you want. You can see there's a variety of styles within this font. And then if you want all of those styles, you just say download the family. If I click here on license, I can see open font license. Use them freely in your products or projects, but you just can't sell them on your own. So that's no problem at all, of course. Okay, so I will download the family. Don't even need to log in. It's really nice. I can say save, and I'll save montserrat.zip. Okay, that'll just take a second to download. These files are quite small. This one's just about 2 megabytes. And then here you can see when I unzip it, which my computer does automatically, you may need to double click on .zip or right click and say, uncompress or unzip or something like that. But you'll wind up with a bunch of these TTF files. So TTF is the file type that's you're most commonly going to use. I think you'll see a couple other ones out there. OTF might be one, but I would just try to stick to TTF. And if you want these installed on the computer, you just double click them, and then at least on the Mac, it'll give me the opportunity to install the font. But in this case, these fonts do not actually need to be installed because of the way that we're going to use them with @FontFace. So let's head over to W3 Schools, our favorite place, and we can see here the @FontFace rule. So we haven't used this before, the @ symbol. This goes in your CSS, and it's just 2 lines. There's the font family, and that needs to be named whatever you want, but of course it makes sense to name it after the font you downloaded. And then the source is a URL that we have to direct somewhere on our computer. So let's go ahead and give this a try. I'm going to head back into Atom. Okay, so I've taken the time to copy over my work from website number 3. So this is the index copied over, and this is the style copied over. Just to make sure I did it right, I'm going to right-click here, Reveal in Finder, and then open this up locally in Firefox, and I can see, indeed, that's a functioning copy of my website number 3. Check that the anchors work. Great, everything's looking fine. So we want to add in this @font face rule. I'll copy this again, and then I'll head back over to Atom, into my CSS page, and up at the top, even before body, I like to put my fonts way up high. And if you want to be super fancy, we can also start to organize our site, right? So this right here is a comment. If I make a sandwich, which is a /*, then some material, followed by */, and you can have as many asterisks in there as you like, but sometimes I like to leave these inside the CSS so I can flip through and understand what my sections are. Oh, and look at that. Okay, hit enter in the wrong spot. So let's put @fontface in there, and then I can just remind myself that that's the font section. So the @fontface is going to currently be called my first font, and then the source URL needs to point to not sensationlight.woff. So let's go double check. Here you can see our index is sitting in this folder. Then it needs to enter the font folder, and we haven't done this before. It needs to enter the Montserrat folder, and then it needs to pick one of these in particular. So let's style one of our headings here, in which case I'll just pick, now let's go with italic because that's interesting. I want to copy this over with everything, including whether it's uppercase or lowercase, including the .ttf at the end. And I'll paste this in here. But that's not going to do everything, right? Because to get here from my index page, I also need to go fonts // So every time we see a slash in a path like this, that means that we're traveling from one folder to another before we get to the thing we're trying to locate. Okay? Let's go check out here and make sure we like... now I can finally see what my problem is. So after I thought about this, the true path from index is actually enter the fonts folder, enter the Montserrat folder, and then finally wind up at Montserrat, black italic. So I'll copy this, paste it, and put in another slash. I can come back over to my local instance, reload it, and now all of the H1 tags have inherited that new font, which I specifically did not install on my computer, right? So this is the beauty of @fontface, because the website actually downloads the font to all of your users on the fly, so they don't need to have things on their computer. Okay, that's how you use @fontface. Oh, and one last thing I should mention, if you want to use more than one custom font, which will be part of our assignment, note that you can't just stack up these two lines. You have to make a whole new @fontface. So if I download an additional font, I would copy over this entire section. It would still just say @fontface, but then I would name a new font family, and I would give it a new source URL. So this has confused a lot of people in the past because you're just naming the same thing over and over again, which does not work in other types of CSS. But in this case, that's how you use multiple custom fonts.